Can start. Okay. Good morning again, everyone. So this is a formal stroke informal event because SOAS is home for me. I was here for what, 5 years, and I'm longer because of COVID. So the proceedings will be formal, sort of, but informal. So please feel comfortable, feel that you're in my home as well. This is, so it's really, and it's home for many of us here, Bulama, and His Royal Highness, who's also coming, will be joining us shortly. He's on his way in from the airport. So he'll be formally opening the exhibition. So that was also home for him. And then, of course, I have my professors here. Professor Banda Farida, she's here, and then Professor Mashud Badere as well. So please, this is home. But it's important also for me to sort of have a formal welcome remarks because so I can set the stage. I'll try and keep to the 10 minutes that they gave me. So good morning, everyone. And it's with a deep sense of honor and personal privilege to welcome you here to what we're going to call a space of memory, reflection, and above all, of hope and responsibility. Today is not just another day on the calendar. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to sort of welcome those that are online as well. We have quite a huge audience online. Apologies. So good morning to those who have joined us remotely. Today is not just another day on the calendar. It marks 11 years since 276 schoolgirls were abducted from Chibok, a moment that shook the world, but whose aftermath still echoes in the lives of those left behind. For me, this is not just advocacy. It is not just work. It is personal. As a mother, as a Nigerian, and as the founding CEO of the Murtala Muhammed Foundation, I have walked beside the families of Chibok. I have seen their grief, but also their grace. I have witnessed their unimaginable pain, but also their relentless courage. And I carry their stories with me as fire, as fuel, and as a constant call to action. Indeed, the photographs that you view later today are drawn from the Stolen Daughters, a book that illuminates the lives and stories of the Chibok girls, both those who returned and those still missing, from the eyes of their families. It was conceived in response to skepticism that no girls were stolen from Chibok. So this book is not just a collection of images. It is a profound narrative woven with the threads of trauma, resilience, and hope. It captures not only the horror of abduction, but also the quiet, enduring strength of those girls and their families whose lives have been shattered and yet remain unbroken in spirit. The photographs bring us face to face with the human cost of violence, reminding us that behind every statistic lies a person with a name, a family, and a future taken too soon. Akintunde Akinleye, whose photography forms the visual backdrop of the Stolen Daughters, has done something extraordinary in these images. He has given a voice to the voiceless. His photography allowed me to not just document events, it demanded that we look and that we listen and that we act. Through his lens, we are invited to witness the strength of the families of these young women, to understand the depth of their pain and to carry their stories beyond the confines of tragedy, transforming them into a powerful call for justice and action. From the preface by former President Olusegun Obasanjo, who is the chairman of the Murtala Muhammed Foundation, to the essays featured in this collection, the writing are as much a call to action as the photography, as they are a reflection on the challenges we face in addressing the aftermath of violence and displacement. Each essay is a testament to the voices of those who are not only witnessing history, but shaping it. His Royal Highness Emir Mohammed Sanusi offers a deeply insightful perspective on the intersection of education, governance, and social justice, reminding us that true change can only come through inclusive and transformative leadership. Religious leaders such as Bishop Matthew Kuka and Nuruddin Lemu, with their unflinching moral clarity, underscore the importance of faith, reconciliation, and the rebuilding of trust in a fractured society. Their words resonate with the urgency of healing and the necessity of creating a peaceful and just society. Activists like Fatima Akilu, Jibrin Ibrahim, Chris Kwaja, Aisha Muhammed, whose tireless work has focused on the empowerment of women and the protection of marginalized communities, bring a much-needed focus to the role of grassroots action in the fight for human dignity and rights. We must also acknowledge the work of the contributors. Those are the people who went into Chibok when the insurgency was raging, led by Adaobi Ubani, whose personal commitment and dedication to journalism have shaped the powerful essays we reflect on today. All the contributions to the Stolen Daughters of Chibok are not simply academic. They are born of years of experience and a deep desire for change. The essays in the book invite us into a moral struggle, urging us to confront the injustices faced by the Chibok girls, many of whom are still missing. Today, nearly 88 of these girls remain unaccounted for. That's not just a statistic, but 88 daughters, 88 dreams, 88 families trapped in uncertainty. While the world has moved on, they remain frozen in time, and that fading global attention is one of the greatest injustices. I remember my visit to Chibok on the first anniversary of the abductions. There, I saw not just survivors, but warriors, truth tellers who refused to be erased. Political violence in our region and in Africa generally is systemic. It's a failure to invest in people, particularly women and girls, offering only displacement, silence, or recruitment. But even in the face of such violence, the people of Chibok, especially the girls and their daughters, have chosen to hope and rebuild. Today, we gather not just to remember, but to resist forgetting. We honor their resilience and demand that we listen, reflect, and act. To hold this commemoration here at SOAS, where I completed my PhD, is especially meaningful. This institution helps shape my thinking on justice, conflict, and rights. To return here now to speak not just from the head, but from the heart is a full circle moment. I want to thank the SOAS faculty, Professor Mashoud Badering, Professor Farida Banda, Professor Lynn Welchman, Professor Emilia Onyema, and Professor Gina Heathcote for embracing this commemoration with such open arms. But today is not just about institutions, it's about people. It's about the families still waiting, the girls still healing, the communities still rebuilding. It's about survivors who are here with us, who will share their testimonies virtually of pain, but also of power. Your courage, and of course, it's about our guests who are here to support us. Your courage, our collective courage here, lights a path ahead, and it reminds us of why this work matters. We are joined today also as panelists, remarkable voices. We've got Aisha Muhammed, UN Deputy Secretary General, whose fierce commitment to girls' education and women's empowerment continues to transform global policy. We have Bulama Bukati, whose deep analysis of extremist violence brings clarity and urgency to our understanding of this crisis. We have Osai Ojigbo, a tireless advocate for justice and gender equality, whose voice has long been a shield for the voiceless. We have Akintunde Akinleye, a powerful photographer whose images give voice, transforming stories of tragedy into a call for global action and justice. And we have Elizabeth Pearson, an expert in conflict studies, whose research has provided critical insights into the underlying causes of violence and the plight of men, women, and children in conflict zones. Joining us virtually also, we have Professor Funke Okome, whose unrelenting focus on gender and African politics continues to reshape narratives and policies alike. We're also deeply honored to have later on this afternoon as honorary patron of the exhibition, His Highness Emir Mohammed Sanusi II, whose leadership continues to speak loudly and boldly, and whose commitment to reform, justice, and education for all, especially for girls, remains an inspiration. This program, from its exhibition to its conversations, is not just about remembrance. It's a call to conscience. It is a call to rebuild not just schools, but systems, not just classrooms, but futures. This is a reminder that education is not charity. It is a right, and justice is not optional. It is owed. To the survivors amongst us, stories are the soul of this work. You are not here to be pitied. You are here to be heard. You're not broken. You are blazing. And it is our collective duty to ensure that your journey is not just remembered, but honored with meaningful action. I must crave your indulgence to thank my family, my husband, Benga, my children, my daughter Azai is here, my brother, Riskwa, my nephews, Zach Sr. is here. I've got Abdullah, Murtala, Ibrahim, and also Zach Jr., and all of our dearest friends that are here for their steadfast support and love, and for really being patient and standing behind me when I went into some very dangerous spaces. They have been my strength and my safe place, my constant reminder of what we fight for, a world where no child is stolen from her future, where no parents waits in vain, where every girl can thrive free from fear. I'd like to take a moment to express our deepest gratitude to our generous sponsors, the Ford Foundation and Kuramo Capital. Your unwavering commitment to justice, equality, and the empowerment of women and girls has made this event possible. The Ford Foundation's enduring support for human rights, education, and community resilience continues to inspire us all, while Kuramo's Capital's dedication to investing in transformative change has made a tangible difference in the lives of many. We are truly grateful for your partnership and for standing with us in this crucial cause. Your contributions are not just financial, they are a testament to your belief in the power of the collective action to create a more just and equitable world. Thank you for being such vital allies in this journey. And to our distinguished guests, I can't name everybody, I've said it again. From near and far, thank you. Thank you so much for being here in person and virtually. Your presence is a promise that we will not forget, that we will not remain silent, that we will keep walking this road together. Let us listen, let us learn, and above all, let us act. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, mothers, sisters, and our beloved daughters. 11 years ago, a tragedy unfolded in Chibok that shook not only Nigeria, but the world. 276 schoolgirls, our girls, were abducted from their school in Borno State by Boko Haram. Today, many of them remain missing. This unspeakable act of terror remains etched in our collective memory. It is a cruel reminder of the violence and insecurity faced by far too many women and girls, especially in conflict zones. As we honor the courage and the resilience of these young women, we pray for those who never made it back. We hold close those still missing, and we walk beside those who returned, carrying invisible wounds, yet determined to rebuild their lives. Life will never be the same for them, their families, or their communities. On this day of remembrance, I urge all who have means and influence to do everything possible to ensure the safe return of the remaining girls. Dear friends and sisters, recovery requires more than rescue. It requires healing, education, justice, and opportunity. It requires community and solidarity. We recognize the Murtala Muhammed Foundation for convening us each year and for their unwavering commitment to keeping the memories and the futures of these girls alive. We pay tribute to Dr. Mero Mandara, whose school has become not just a place of learning, but a sanctuary of hope. To Dr. Fatima Akilu and the Neem Foundation, whose work on mental health has been life-saving for so many survivors. We honor those who have used their voices and platforms to ensure the world does not look away. Sarah Sievers, who opened her home here in the United States to 4 of the Chibok girls and has never stopped championing their cause. Tasawudu Tumaji, Obi Ezekwesili, Hadiza Balabasman, your steadfast advocacy continues to inspire action. We must ensure long-term support for the girls who have returned, including mental health and psychosocial care, education, and economic opportunities. This will help them to heal and to thrive. We must also pursue accountability. Those responsible for these atrocities must face justice. Today, we reaffirm our solidarity, not only with our Chibok girls, but with every woman, girl, and boy who has endured violence and conflict. The United Nations stands with you. We must redouble our efforts to create a world where every girl can live free from fear and violence, where her rights are respected, where she can learn, grow, and lead. Let us mark this anniversary, not only with remembrance, but with resolve. Let us say together, never again. Thank you.
So for the next item on the agenda, I'm going to call on Dr. Bulama Bukati and Dr. Elizabeth Person, where we'll have a 30-minute discussion on the topic of today. Thank you both very much. Okay, so I'm going to start Bulama. And like I said, it's bit, so we'll go from the formal to the informal. But one thing I do remember about Bulama is when we were doing this work together, he, what would I say? Harassed Boko Haram so much, they actually declared a fatwa on him. So if you're looking for somebody who's ever had a fatwa declared on him by Boko Haram, this is somebody here sitting with us, this is Bulama Bukati. And I'm sure in some of the things you'll talk about, you probably share a little bit about that experience because it was quite harrowing. And I remember, I think it was Professor Mashoud, saying to both of us at that time that we do need to be a little bit careful. But the amazing thing though about SOAS was that, and our research did push the envelope, but they gave us all the room and the space to be able to do that. So thank you. So my first question for you, it was open just now, sorry, it's gone. Maybe you can talk a little bit around that experience with Boko Haram, and talk a little bit about that, just as background context.
No, thank you very much. Auntie Aisha, she did say it's going to be semi-formal, so when I say Auntie Aisha, I mean her. Permit me also to start by recognizing and appreciating Professor Mashoud Badrin, who was my supervisor, my first supervisor, and Professor Farida Banda. Of course, Professor Lynch Waltzman was my second supervisor, but I have never told Professor Farida Banda this. She didn't supervise me, but the first day I met her, she asked me 3 questions, which made me question my PhD from the first day until the last day. And that made me sit up and made sure that if I met another Farida Banda in the external examination, then I have prepared a good answer for them. And that experience did shape my thinking. And I think I first met her at a Chibok anniversary event, and then I went to her office and she came with these questions and I was like, am I ready for this? But that in the end became something that shaped my thinking and helped me do a better job, I believe. Now, Hajia Aisha wants me to talk about my own experience being declared wanted by Boko Haram. This is about the Chibok girls, and I want it to be really about the Chibok girls. But if that will do anything in terms of informing us about the gravity of Boko Haram, the first death threat from Boko Haram came on the 1st of November, 2019, a day I will never forget. And I was actually cycling on my bicycle to our office in London when I was working for the Tony Blair Institute. A friend of mine, Abdul Basit Kasim, texted me saying, on the way I had to stop at a hospital because I had a medical checkup. And while waiting at the reception, I saw a message from him asking me where I was and what I was doing. And I told him, and he said, "Be careful. Boko Haram is digging up information about you. They have been asking people about you and your family." And I was like, okay. I didn't take that seriously. I then cycled to the Tony Blair Institute after the hospital appointment. Sitting on my desk, I looked at social media, and all over social media was Shekau shouting my name, declaring me an apostate who should be killed, as someone who has betrayed Islam by traveling to England and working with Westerners in his language, and as someone who should be targeted anywhere. And that was a Friday. And I remember that was one of the scariest days of my life. I was in England. I might be safe, but my mother was in northeastern Nigeria. My siblings, some of whom resemble me, were in the northeast, and I knew that there was no one who was going to protect them. And that was just one of 5 threats to come, under 4 other threats during the COVID lockdown. And I think even without threat, every one of us suffered during the COVID lockdowns. And I remember that day in the morning when the 3rd threat came, I came to my desk in the living room to start my work, working from home. My 6-year-old daughter at the time came into the room while I was watching the thread video, the 3rd one, and I didn't know how she came into the room. I just had her ask me, "Dad, why is this man shouting your name?" I couldn't tell her the truth, but I couldn't lie to my daughter. And just the thought that I would spend 6 years without visiting Nigeria, without going to see my family, is unfathomable. When I first moved to London, I never thought I could ever live outside Nigeria. But when I first moved, I would go back every 3 months to visit my family. But it's been 6 years now, and we are still counting. When Shekau died, the first death that will make my mother happy was that she rang me, and she was shouting at the top of her voice. She was celebrating that Shekau was dead and that I could visit home. But even after that, I couldn't visit. Of course, there were other fatwas from Ansaru, the Al-Qaeda affiliate, who started circulating my photos on their Telegram group, also calling for my death. And the most recent one last year was from Bello Turiji, the kidnapped kingpin in northwestern Nigeria, who also shouted my name, calling me a Jewish lanky, and lots of unprintable names, all because of this work. None of this will deter any of us. None of this experience comes even close to what the Chibok girls endured. And none of this comes close to what our people in the northeastern part of Nigeria and now in the northwest are going through. And the more we decide to stay silent, the more the horror will spread and the more it will consume every single one of us. And therefore, every single word, I have never regretted anything I have done. I will continue to speak up for my people, and I will continue to speak against those who are killing people for no reason and bringing a dark stain on the image of Islam, because they claim to be fighting for Islam. They kill Muslims, they kill women and children who are forbidden to be killed by Islam, and they continue to claim to fight for Islam. There couldn't have been a bigger paradox.
Thank you so much, Bulama. And it's really important because the emotions and even what the horrors you've gone through really, I think, paints a really good picture for us. I've said thank you to Bulama, that the emotions that he's going through already paints a very strong picture for us of what an encounter with Boko Haram must be like. So can you imagine what we're talking about with these girls who have been with them for 11 years? There are 88 girls still missing. But so we can now talk a little bit about the Chibok girls and the international dimension, because that's the work that you're doing around this scourge of terrorism. What is it that, what is the problem? Do you understand the question? What exactly is, and what is it that we're not doing, or what is it that we can do?
Yeah, I mean, let's just take a moment to reflect on the Chibok incident and what has evolved in the northeastern part of Nigeria and across the world since then. It was 276 girls stolen just like that in the dead of the night from their schools. No one could have imagined that terrorists would walk into a school and walk away with the whole student body without being challenged by anyone. And we now know that these girls were forced to walk for days and days and days and nights, and no one challenged the terrorists until they took them to where they wanted to take them to. And it was not just daughters that were stolen on that day. It was dreams, it was futures, it was generations that were stolen, dreams that were shattered, families devastated forever. We say time flies, 11 years has flown by, but for the parents, it feels like 11 decades, if not 11 centuries. Because every single day, everyone who knocks on their door, they would expect their daughter to come in, but someone else would come in. Every news story in the world, they are searching for the names, for the faces of their daughters as being rescued from Boko Haram. And when the hashtag started on the 14th of April and thereafter, and the news started and the global outcry built, we saw the world come together. From Abuja to London, from Washington to Tokyo, millions demanded the rescue of the girls and justice. Presidents and prime ministers spoke. Clerics and celebrities posted on social media, and we made a promise. Unfortunately, instead of the rescue that we hoped on that day, what we saw was slow, agonizing letdown, slow, agonizing betrayal. Today, many have forgotten about the Chibok girls. They are only remembered by those who cannot forget them. And since the Chibok incident, there have been 10 other mass school kidnappings in Nigeria. 10 other mass school kidnappings, including the Dapchi abduction in February 2018, when 110 girls were abducted. The Jangebe kidnapping in February 2020, when 317 girls were abducted. And the latest one was the one in the Federal University Gusau, where 14 female students were abducted, all from their school dormitories. Schools in Nigeria are not safer today than the 14th of April 2014 when the Chibok incident happened. And there is nothing, completely, absolutely nothing today to stop another Chibok kidnapping in Nigeria. So we owe the Chibok girls more than just remembrance. We owe them action. We owe our daughters a country where you can go to school and come back. We owe our daughters a country where education is not a dangerous gamble with life. We owe our daughters a nation where education is a right, not a risk. And unfortunately, that's not what we see on the ground. Thousands of women have been abducted. Many are still in captivity, and the country just moves on. Today, it's no longer even news for schools to be abducted in Nigeria. There was a school in Niger State where you had students abducted, and a part of the school had to be sold to pay off the kidnappers, to pay ransom for the release of the students. Only in Nigeria could this happen. And of course, across the world, the same thing continues. Women and girls are used as objects of war. Rape is used in a large scale, every single geography you go to. And women are in the main, not the perpetrators anywhere in the world, but they are in the main the victims. The Nigerian government and the UN, in a report published 2-3 years ago, estimated that 400,000 people will have died in the Boko Haram crisis. 400,000 people. 90% of them are children below the age of 5. 90%.
Thank you so much, Bulama. And if we think we've heard it all, then there's another dimension. The first time I met Liz, I met her at Chatham House. And we were talking again about Boko Haram. And Liz started to talk about her work. So Liz has been documenting female suicide bombers. So in the entire history of the world, Boko Haram has used the most number of women and girls as suicide bombers. So I know today we're talking about the Chibok girls, but I think it's important for us to understand the scale of the horror. And so I want Liz to talk a little bit around her research and the fact that what is it about terrorist groups like Boko Haram and the use of gender and violence? What is it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Aisha. And thanks, Bulama, also for that account of what happened to you and just, illustrating the dangers, not just of living in northeast Nigeria, but of trying to do the work to expose these things. And both of you have been extremely courageous, I think, in the work that you've done in bringing these issues to light. And when this abduction took place 11 years ago, I think governments were still not very aware. Security actors were quite ignorant, or at least they weren't putting into practice the knowledge that they had about the types of abuses that groups like Boko Haram were inflicting upon civilian communities. So the abductions took place, then they were denied, then the government, I think, said that they had returned the girls within the first few days, and then, of course, it became apparent that that was not true. This abduction was one, actually, of many. It was just so big that it could not be ignored. And as you rightly say, unfortunately, time has pushed the events and the young women and girls who remain in captivity somewhat to the margins. We know how important gender-based strategies are to jihadist groups like Boko Haram. And it's strategic. This violence against women and girls is part of a way of controlling populations. It's also symbolic. If you can attack the enemy populations, women and girls, you can show their vulnerabilities. And we see gender is really important in understanding not just Boko Haram, but Islamic State West Africa province. These two, on the face of it, jihadist groups, they do have things that differentiate them. And one of those differentiations was through actually the way that they implemented gender-based violence. The ideologies of these groups are strongly gendered: men as fighters, women as supporters, women as part of, producing the next generation in terms of, the Dawla Islamiyah that Shekau had declared in northeast Nigeria. And we've seen similar in Islamic State, of course. But the rape, the enslavement of women in Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, that was about Yazidi women. In northeast Nigeria, this was often about Christian women. And, Bulama, you mentioned the Dapchi abductions by Islamic State West Africa province. I don't know how much you know about them, but two rival groups, and they use these abductions in a way to kind of try and show that they were the more merciful aggressors in this situation, returning all but one of those young women a month later. So there's a kind of competition using gender-based violence between these groups. Aisha, you mentioned the female suicide bombing campaign, which was really associated with Abu Bakr Shekau. Bulama, you obviously alluded to the fact that while these groups claim to be Muslim and they claim to have the ownership of Islam, what they're doing is not actually condoned in Islam. And I think female suicide bombing attacks are obviously part of that. Abubakar Shekau explicitly capitalized on the abductions of the Chibok girls to start a campaign of female suicide bombing, so-called attacks, a couple of months later. And of course, the fear was huge amongst Nigerians that these were those young women that were being sent out in those coerced attacks. So this was all part of a huge publicity stunt, essentially, for Boko Haram, of which we see the image from a video that Shekau produced in order to instrumentalize these young women to show power. And unfortunately, we see that not just in Nigeria or Iraq and Syria in the defeated Islamic States, but in many other countries that are where jihadist groups are operating. And we're also seeing this in far-right groups, this same kind of gendered binary, the same exploitation of violence against women, and the same exploitation actually of violence against men, because young men and boys have also been abducted in huge numbers in Nigeria, and often not enslaved, but killed or forced to fight for these groups. So the gender-based strategy is really, it's impossible to understand these groups, or in fact, contemporary extremism and extremist violence without thinking about gender. And one of the fortunate things in the light of these attacks has been that the United Nations, for whatever good it's done on the ground, but has implemented Security Council resolutions that explicitly do recognise that gender-based violence is instrumental to what jihadist groups are doing. And also, more recently, that survivors must be important, and caring for survivors, recognising survivors, which really hasn't happened and happens in a very patchy and sporadic way, getting them access to justice and protections and provisions that, it is at least inscribed in UN Security Council resolutions, even if, and I'm sure Bulama and Aisha, you can both reflect on this, on the ground, access to psychological support, access to justice, because, we don't see that always. These abuses occur without impunity. And unfortunately, we also know that these abuses are not just carried out by violent extremist groups. They can often be carried out by actors that civilians should be able to rely upon for security, and obviously not just in the Nigerian context. So the military, police, people running camps for internally displaced people. So I could go on, but I think I'll throw it back to Bulama and Aisha to reflect on some of that, especially in terms of protections and justice, really.
So before I take it to Bulama, let me just sort of follow up. So obviously what you're suggesting is, so we have all these policies that, I'm sorry. Before I take it to Bulama, let me just throw it back to you a little bit later. So we have all these policies, and there's a lot of engagement at the strategic level. But what is the problem? Why is there no trickle down? What are the systemic barriers to accountability and justice? What is it that's making it so challenging?
Okay, well, I'll be trying to be brief so we can, but there's kind of, I think there hasn't been a recognition of gender, and gender is very often still thought about as just being about women and just being about the protection of women. So there hasn't been a push to get women's voices at the table, to get them participating. And actually what you saw with the Chibok abductions was not just this day in which, women were victimized on this day, and they continue to be victimized. And yes, they are courageous, and they do survive, and they will survive. But we saw as a result of that day the resilience of the women around. So women in the legal space, women in the civil society action space, including yourself, Aisha. So we saw an awful lot of resilience and resistance. But this was coming grassroots often, and this was not invited. This was rising up in anger and emotion at having to push back and fill that void because the people in power perhaps were not doing this. So that's one thing. It's about creating that space for women's participation and inviting them in, and not just waiting for them to say, no, we've had enough. We are going to invite ourselves in. And then to also recognize that gender-based inequalities across by violent extremist groups. We don't have, in Europe or in America, white supremacists without having racial inequality inscribed throughout society. We don't have a Boko Haram that emerges out of a vacuum in terms of gender-based inequalities. And we can't simply impose or superimpose Western, global North, counterterrorism and countering violent extremism programs onto a context in which they don't fit. They're not right, and they're not necessarily wanted and won't succeed. There need to be bottom-up responses to these crises and ongoing crises in order for people to be protected and for this to work. And clearly we've got issues around governance in northeast Nigeria that are particular to that region and that locality. So there's a number of different factors, but UN Security Council resolutions on paper are one thing, but getting that in practice at grassroots is another thing. So it's about joining these things up. And of course, promoting women's rights whilst also recognizing the ways men are victims is part of that. I'll close that.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. So back to you, Bulama, which means that based on what Liz has just described, so if you look at the global security, oh my, I'm so sorry. I think my microphone will follow me. So if you look at the global security architecture, same question. What are the systemic barriers? What is, I keep asking this, what is the problem? Because we've been talking about this non-ending for years. We're talking 11 years. What is it within the global security architecture that is a barrier to solving a lot of these problems?
So, it's a complex question, and that's why you haven't got an answer, even though you have been asking this question for a long time. I'll just highlight three major issues. The first, Haja, is simply lack of political will. For example, when the Chibok abductions happened, the first reaction of the federal government of Nigeria was denying it. President Jonathan denied it, his wife denied it, and they kept saying it didn't happen. And during these few days, the critical few days when they were denying it, Boko Haram was marching the children into the bush. It was marching the girls into the bush. It was finding hiding places for them. By the time the government said, yes, it had happened, then they then started lying that they had returned the girls. And that took another few critical weeks. And then we saw the global outcry after the Bring Back Our Girls hashtag had started. And so you clearly would see the lack of political will. And then you continue to see dither and delay on the part of the government, pushing blames. President Jonathan saying there are Boko Haram members in my own government, but he never fished them out. So he kept a government with Boko Haram members until the end of the administration. And then President Buhari, who was an opposition figure at the time, turned the Chibok girls into a political football and started, pestering the government with the Chibok girls issue and started promising that he would rescue them. And one of President Buhari's key campaign promises at the time was about Boko Haram and the Chibok girls. What did he do when he went into power? Because he was going to look for a second term, he became desperate about rescuing the Chibok girls. And I think he was right to be desperate. But the policy he implemented only exacerbated the situation. He gave Boko Haram millions of euro, estimated 5 million euros to release 102 or so of the Chibok girls. 3 million euros for the first, and then another 2 million euros. And what do you imagine would happen if you gave a terrorist group like Boko Haram, 5 million euros in the most in the most poverty-stricken part of Nigeria? They used it to stock more arms and ammunition. They recruited more young people, and then they unleashed more havoc on schools, on markets, on hospitals, on internally displaced people's camps, everywhere. And we saw them in Kano, we saw them in Plateau, we saw them in Abuja, attacks everywhere in northern Nigeria to the level that the whole of northern Nigeria became completely grounded. Hundreds of schools were closed, and they are still closed. And so the first point is simple lack of political will. The second is institutional weaknesses. And in this case, three major institutions, if you like. Number one, the military institution is weak. Endemic corruption, $2 billion budgeted and allocated for security went missing under the President Jonathan administration. Buhari said he would investigate it, and billions of naira under him went missing, according to the National Security Advisor. And when you go to the defense headquarters in Abuja, and I have been there doing interviews, you would see military generals. And if you didn't know, you would mistake them for a woman that will give birth today, a 9-month-old woman. I don't know how a military general will have that pot belly and still claim to be a military general. They are happy, they are joyous, and they are merrymaking in Abuja, while the boots on the ground are dying in Borno and Yobe State. You have soldiers on the ground buying their own boots. You have a General Adeniyi, I think, who on video came out, a military general on the ground, saying we are out-weaponed by Boko Haram. Boko Haram has more weapons than us. In 2016, 2017, I was in the one deep of the Nigerian army in Jos, defending 13 military soldiers who were alleged to have failed to fight Boko Haram. They were court-martialed for alleged failure to fight Boko Haram. And the evidence I saw on that trial is just staggering. I saw 13 military officers being prosecuted. They had a platoon of 37 soldiers. They were attacked by over 300 Boko Haram members. The Boko Haram members, each of them had a bag. He was wearing a bag behind him with hundreds of bullets. The 37 soldiers who were facing them had only one armor man. And you will have 3 cartridges. You will be in your trench. You shoot and shoot and shoot. When it's finished, you crawl back to the armor man to get more weapons. And how many? 37 of them, only 3 of them had general purpose machine gun. The remaining 34 had only their personal rifles. And the 3 general purpose machine guns, they were bought during Chagari. And so they had stoppages. When you shoot for 3-4 minutes, it will get too hot and it will stop. You keep it, you pour pure water on it, sachet water, and you keep shooting with your personal rifle, and you have Boko Haram armed with AA, anti-aircraft weapons. They were shooting anti-aircraft weapons on human beings. And why are these 13 being prosecuted? They are being prosecuted to cover up for the generals who are stealing the money in Abuja. So corruption, weakness in the defense, especially in defense procurement. We have spent, are they saying, 16 trillion naira on fighting Boko Haram? If you gave Shekau one budget, Nigeria's budget for 1 year, he will undo the whole of Nigeria. Because the terrorists are using their money, we are stealing our money. And why are we doing that? Partly because the Chibok girls, the 1,700 girls that were boys and girls that were stolen since Chibok, none of them was the daughter of a governor. None of them came from the house of an emir. None of them was the daughter of a president. And because they didn't go to school for the crime of coming from the poor families in northern Nigeria, their life is nothing. You have institutional weakness if you leave the military on the investigative and prosecutory agencies. The police is the most understaffed agency that is the most overburdened with Nigeria's security or law and order. You have 250 estimates, say, police officers in Nigeria. 40% of them are on providing security to governors and the president, shining their shoes, holding their wives' bags, and opening doors for them when they enter a car. 40% of them are on those special duties and on administrative duties. So you have 60% of 250 to police and keep order in a country of 220 million people. And so even where the military regains territory, because they cannot stay there, they need a police, an equipped police force to hand over to. There is no that force there. They are under-equipped, they are understaffed. They have a very small budget. Some of them receive 500 naira. 500 naira is it 33 cents per month. Divisional police office receiving 33 cents per month as their monthly allocation. And they are more than corrupt. Police officers are more than corrupt in Nigeria. And they are the people charged with the responsibility of investigating and preparing prosecution for Boko Haram members. And you have judges that are also demoralized, a justice system that is endemically corrupt. And then finally, there is no support, legal support, psychosocial support, and other kinds of supports for the victim. In fact, if any victim wants to seek justice, they risk relieving the trauma. They will be re-traumatized and they will be stigmatized by their own communities. Aisha and I wrote a few years ago on CNN how the Chibok mothers had become a pariah in their own society. They are being stigmatized, the mothers, in their own society. People telling them your daughters chose to stay with Boko Haram. And so you have all of these weaknesses: lack of political will, endemic corruption in the military and procurement sector, lack of resources for investigation and prosecution, and also lack of legal, psychosocial, and other kinds of supports for the victim. And I think in this kind of environment, you can hardly go anywhere. And of course, I would conclude on this point, if the last 10, 20 years have taught us anything, it is that a purely military action would never succeed. Along with kinetic action, you need heavy investment, socioeconomic investment, investment in jobs and in education, in quality education, and investment in quality education in itself is a medicine, is a solution to the crisis, because you are talking about young people who are being radicalized because they are either uneducated or they are ill-educated. So investment in education, investment in the economy, investment in the society, all of which is still lacking. And over the last 10 years, those communities have only become poorer because of the crisis, as well as continued government neglect.
Thank you so much, Bulama, for that. We actually have literally just 2 minutes to go on the panel. I just wanted you to just add a little bit. What about for schools specifically? What should we be thinking about right now, given what you mentioned? Be able to continue. Okay, I'm so sorry. For schools specifically, what can we do to be able to continue to just protect? Very briefly, before
Yeah, sure. So after, in the wake of the Chibok abductions, there was this safe school declaration by the President Jonathan administration, which President Buhari said he was going to continue to implement. But that's one of the most farcical ideas I have ever heard of in my life. The plan is to insulate schools and to protect them while insecurity festers in the rest of the society. It's like isolating your eye and protecting it while a cancer is eating your body. How can you protect schools when insecurity is everywhere in the rest of the society? And so they did the Safe School Declaration, and then we saw another 10 other Chibok abductions in a period of 2 years or a bit more. Of course, gladly, many of those children have been released, ransoms have been paid, and they have been released. But imagine the trauma, even if you spend just a few weeks with these the beasts. Now, so the way to go, if we want to make schools safe, everyone in the society has to be safe. Aisha, just to conclude, in the last 3 months, we have seen a resurgence of Boko Haram because, in all fairness, Boko Haram has been weakened over the past 3-4 years. But then what we saw over the last few months, in the first quarter of this year alone, Boko Haram launched 397 attacks in Borno State alone, where they killed 514 people and abducted 354 people. And last year, they raised an estimated 1 billion naira in abductions. And today, go to Gamborungala, a local government in Borno State, go to Dambua, go to Goza. Boko Haram is controlling large areas of land. And they are levying taxes on people. Every farmer has to pay 10,000 naira for 1 hectare. And for every bag of anything you farm, you pay them 4,000 before you can harvest. Every fisherman pays, every trader, every herder pays 7,000 naira per head per cow in northeastern Nigeria today. And you have politicians in Abuja saying we have succeeded. Why? Because there is no media attention. And so schools cannot be safe, Haji Aisha. The Safe Schools Initiative cannot work until the whole of society is safe. And the only way the whole of society will be safe is for the Nigerian military to be equipped and to be held responsible to take the fight to the bandits and Boko Haram in the enclaves where they live. Today, it is Boko Haram that is on the offensive, not the Nigerian army. The Nigerian military, they are kept in super camps, and Boko Haram has attacked 7 super camps over the past 3 months. And each of them was overrun. And they stole more weapons and food and medication and other logistics, and they went back into the bush. And if we are not careful, in the next 6 months, Boko Haram will start making the headlines again in the whole of northern Nigeria. And we know what happened in Kano. We know what happened in the palace of the emir of Kano when Boko Haram was allowed to fester in Borno State. We know the attack in the palace of the emir of Kano. And the attacks everywhere in Nigeria, in Plateau, in Abuja, and everywhere. And we risk going back there if no decisive action is taken now.
Thank you. So my last question to you, Liz, is a slight variation of the question. It's not about responsibility as academics, as researchers, and those of us that are here.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is to pay attention, I guess, to shine a light on these issues. And that is not easy, because getting accurate information means putting yourself potentially in danger. And that is difficult for journalists as for academic researchers. Just even getting the right information can be incredibly hard. Then there is the question of power. Talking to survivors, being aware of the courage it takes to go through those emotions, to tell those stories again, and putting those women and girls, or men and boys, if those are the people you are choosing to talk to, at the center of what you are doing. So dealing with organizations, perhaps asking them to gather their own data from one another, rather than you coming in and asking your questions, asking them what they need in terms of resources, knowledge, information, and using language that is appropriate. So listening to what organizations that work with survivors say about how to report or how to write about these situations, so that you are listening and learning and not imposing your own agendas, or if you're a journalist, sensationalizing stories in order to get clicks. And there is a variant of that in academia, of course, because, writing stories can get acclaim for authors, slightly different ways, but same idea. So the idea of having a survivor-centered approach is relevant to journalists, to academics, as well as to the governance, which clearly isn't there, thinking about military approaches, thinking about justice approaches, having those, judicial capacity to deal with those offenders and perpetrators is all part of putting survivors at the center, which is, I think, really what this day is about. It's just one day, but going forward, hopefully the messages from the survivors that are going to be speaking today will register and, you know, carry on beyond. It's important the work gets done, and it's important to focus, but it's also equally important to do that, I think, in the right way. Thanks, Aisha, for the question.
Yeah, dear Aisha, just to compliment Liz briefly, I mean, for the purpose of future prosecutions and truth-telling and reconciliation, what we might need is perhaps a national database to document not just the names and stories of abductees, but also everything that we need about these abductees, because thousands of people have been abducted and we have only the names and faces of very few of them. We have the stories of only a few of them. And if you are prosecuting in the future, whether at the national level or at the international level, you need those stories to succeed. And the more we delay and dither, the more these stories fade into history, and no one is documenting them, as far as I know, in the scale I am talking about, nationally, to document the names, the faces, and the stories of each survivor, especially those who have been abducted and rescued, or ransom is paid and they have come back. I think that's very important. But Aisha, I just want to thank you. You didn't forget the Chibok girls. The world has forgotten them. We cannot afford to forget them. We owe them this remembrance. We owe them more than remembrance. We owe them action. We owe them continued advocacy. We owe them a country that is safe, a country where girls can go to school and come back home. And if we cannot do this as a country, I don't know what we are.
I just want to so this panel is actually through, but to say to both Liz and Bulam, I really feel honored always to be doing this work with you guys, because, you know, it's incredible work that you're doing. So I'm really, really honored and quite humbled to be doing this. We have a testimony from a survivor, one, and then maybe we can if everybody wants to stretch their legs for a minute or so, and then we move on to the second part of the proceedings.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patience Bowles, and though I could not be with you in person today, I am deeply honored to share my story with you. It is difficult to put into words the fear I felt on that night of April 14, 2014. We were just schoolgirls in our dormitory, preparing for exams and dreaming of a future beyond Chibok. Then, in an instant, our world was turned upside down. I can still hear the screams, feel the panic. I remember the helplessness as we were forced into trucks and driven into the darkness, unsure of where we were going or what will happen to us. My mind raced with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. It took immense courage to move my feet and make the escape that changed my life forever. Even after I escaped, the weight of that night never left me. I live in fear, carrying the trauma of what could have been, and thinking constantly of my sisters who never made it home. But I made myself a promise. I will not let my dreams be stolen forever. Education had always been my light, and I knew it had to be my path forward. That journey was not easy. The world moved on, even when we are still struggling to put the pieces of our lives back together. But I was determined. With the support of many who believe in me, I was blessed with the opportunity to complete my education at Dickinson College. Walking across that stage at my graduation was more than just receiving a degree. It was reclaiming the future that had once been taken away from me. It was a moment of victory, not just for me, but for every girl who has ever been told that her life doesn't matter. But even as I speak to you today, 88 of my sisters remain in captivity. It has been 11 years, and they are still waiting. They are still missing. Their families still wake up every day, wondering if they will ever see them again. This is why this gathering is important. We must keep telling their stories. We must keep demanding their return. And we must ensure that no girl anywhere in the world ever has to experience what we went through in Chibok. I want to thank Dr. Aisha Oyebode and all of you here today for keeping this fighting alive, for refusing to let our sisters be forgotten. I pray for the day when we gather not to remember them, but to welcome them home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. So if we could just stretch our feet, just literally 5 minutes, and then we'll all convene back here, 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Bathroom, that's straight through. And if you need anything else, then yeah, just tell me.
I think nice. Yeah, I think it wasn't. No, but I think we need to do the shit a bit. Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
So what do we adjust it?
Just right here, and just here, and you just pass it. So I came here to say, you don't say, you do not say Marcus, but just active. No, explain it. Yeah. Okay. So I was like, but then I was going, so I was like, oh, yeah, well,
Can you see this is the big the seat is hidden. Back to work is this one, but you can't see it. Okay. So we need to move the table a little. Let's move.
Yeah, I think the really good to speak for you. Do you know Chitrina Galachi? So yeah, so I think it'd be good and Aisha as well. So if you for a start, people working on the ground, used to work she went off with friends and she does psychological de-radicalization.
It's perfect. You want, right? No. Yeah? I don't think so. Use the old one. What you sent to yourself? The one I sent to myself wasn't working. The new one, because they were still working.
But and I to be on PhD. Looking at the documents,
Yeah, that's
where it is, and I'm sure the things that Bernard was saying, that the money, the corruption, that, you know, Harvey in 2015 was saying, it's technically deleted. So like, no, it's sort of like, and I was like, I don't know, you don't even like to be a roof or something. But, you know, it was so.
from where? From Nigeria. So Amiras are from certain cities. Embryos are like the traditional rulers.
Or like the clans and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. And who's the main ruler of Nigeria?
The president.
The president. Okay, so,
Yeah. So if, and so I think conflicts they might, I mean, I'm sure you could really
it's uploading.
They don't,
Are you on the
well,
Wi-Fi?
that's fair enough.
I'm on my 5G.
Oh, you
I mean, I
Data.
You only, the Wi-Fi is actually fast.
that is, you know.
The Wi-Fi is fast?
Yeah, it is.
This is on the Wi-Fi, though.
No, that's the Wi-Fi. No, sorry, this is their network. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's coming. Okay, cool.
You know, and
It's only my phone that's on the network.
Oh. So let me see. What's the last one? Go down to the- another thing. This is what-
but at the same time, I still
Go down to the end. I don't know what food this is, but I think most people don't see it.
is to reduce the kind of country, or also like civilians or survivors, where the interviewer is
We use see here.
Just me and
really get to the heart. Yeah. So I would do it that way, and I would start with Aisha. Do you know that? Yeah. Yeah, I would do it that way. Yeah. And then I would also, sorry, yeah, like, and I'd start
Perfect. I think we'll be starting and they're gonna put the video on, right? The video.
yeah, but that's the next on the
Agenda.
agenda. That's the next one.
So I would start with.
What I'll tell her before we start, I'll tell her that this time.
This one or this one?
It's supposed to be this first thing.
This one.
So I don't know if we can. I just. Yes, I'm ready to. I was going to try to prompt her when the time we win. I'm like, oh, this guy is 30 minutes, you have 2 minutes more.
Yeah.
She was like, oh, 2 minutes more. She now still had 10 minutes. Okay, so the thing is, this is the code we need them to scan.
The video is not.
No, the program.
The program is.
Yeah, and I
People say the video is.
You should be there.
Good afternoon. What time is it now? Is this the morning?
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's the morning. It's
What's
11.
morning? Sorry.
Okay.
So it's supposed to be next after the test.
Yes,
Next
yes,
supposed to be
yeah.
the virtual, that the remarks by Professor.
Yes, so
Yes,
it's
that's what
gonna
we
play it, yeah.
But we're only playing the first question because our video is very long. So it's probably
So
like 4
only,
minutes, 30
that-
seconds.
yeah. Good morning again. Once again, thank you all so much for your patience. Because there's a second part to this after this whole event, which is that we need to go and have His Royal Highness formally commission the photo exhibition. It would be nice for us to try and get through the second panel and the second part of the discussion. So I'd really appreciate if we could all sort of sit. Yes, you know, we're all running a little bit behind because we started, I think, 15, 20 minutes late, but it'd be nice if we'll try and keep to time. So for the next, for the second part of the discussion, we've got one of the panelists who's not here. So I interviewed her, but virtually. So we'll play her part of her interview. It's quite long. So what we can do after this is share the rest of it. And then we've got the second panel discussion with Osai and Aki today. And then we have a second survivor testimony and then Q&A. And you can ask both panels, you know, any questions that you have. The Q&A can be as long as you want to, but maybe not too long. And then hopefully, after that, we can then immediately go to the Ichna Gallery where the photo exhibition is up for the formal commissioning. So thank you all so much. And I know that all of you have already sort of met and greeted His Royal Highness, but just to say, to welcome him formally for being here and to thank you for taking the time to be here with us. Thank you so much, Your Highness. Thank you. Professor Kone, it's so nice to have you here. So I just want to start with a couple of questions around the work that you've done, not only as part of the Bring Back Our Girls in New York, which is where I met you, and we started working together, but also around a lot of the academic work that you've done. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, can you provide a broader context on the intersection of governance, gender, and post-conflict recovery across Africa?
I will speak about Nigeria, which is the focus of my research. The intersection of governance, gender, and post-conflict recovery is a complex issue that is deeply influenced by entrenched structural violence and patriarchal norms. So I'm going to talk about maybe 5 or 6 ways. First of all, governance and gender. Nigerian governance is suboptimal due to the exclusion and marginalization of women. Nigeria ranks very low in global gender indexes, indicating widespread gender inequality affecting various aspects of life, including political representation, economic opportunities, legal rights, education, and security. The underrepresentation of women in political positions are seen in the low number of female ministers and the decline in women's representation in the National Assembly exemplifies this exclusion. This situation is partly attributed by me to a patriarchal governance system that considers women primarily as procreators belonging to the private sphere. Good governance, characterized by principles like equity, inclusiveness, and respect for human rights, is lacking in Nigeria. This contributes to the persistence of gender disparities in our dear country. The Ibrahim Index of Governance in Africa uses various metrics, including political power and representation of women, equal rights, civil liberties for women, and laws on violence against women to assess gender equality performance, further linking governance and gender as important elements in a well-functioning democracy. Now, to turn to gender and conflict. Conflict, particularly in the Boko Haram insurgency that we have experienced in Nigeria and the neighboring countries, has had devastating and gendered impacts. Women and girls have been subjected to extreme brutality, including abduction, use of young women as suicide bombers, sexual slavery, and forced labor. The abduction of the Chibok and Dachi girls and many other women and girls in Nigeria are significant examples of how conflict exacerbates the vulnerabilities of girls and hinders their access to education. These abductions and the violence inflicted are linked to patriarchal nationalism, where women are seen as only vessels for procreation. The failure of the state to provide adequate security, particularly in marginalized regions, represents that there is a disregard for the welfare of vulnerable populations, and it is a manifestation of structural violence. Now let's come to post-conflict recovery and gender. Genuine post-conflict recovery must address this deep-seated and deeply rooted gender inequalities and the impact of structural adjustment, which I will explain a bit subsequently. The local societal response to the abduction of girls in conflict zones indicates a broader issue where the lives of poor and marginalized Nigerians, particularly women and girls, are undervalued. For effective recovery, there needs to be a redistribution and reorganization of economic, social, and political power in a democratic and inclusive manner. This includes ensuring women's full access to the rights of citizenship and implementing gender-sensitive policies and programs in areas like education and security. Let me now turn to the role of structural.
Is that the second part of the question? Okay, how many minutes is it?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, we cut it right in the middle. Sorry about that. It actually turned out to be quite long. So we thought we could share it wider so that we can continue with the panels. But the links to the program will take you to the video. You know, Professor Kumi is an academic, so 5 minutes sounds like 10 sometimes. Okay, thank you all so much. So I'm going to call both Osaya and Akintude to the podium for the second panel. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you both so much for being here. And I'm not sure if I mentioned on the program, we actually have the profile of the panelists, so I didn't think it's necessary to go through the panel, the profile of the panelists. But just when I'm starting with Osai, just to what Osai was actually head of Amnesty in Nigeria at the time when it happened. So she was actually on the ground and she did a lot of work around the Chibok girls. So really having her here is such an honor for us. And there's lots of things that you hear about what happened at those initial stages that I'm sure some of us do not even know about. And then Akintunde, you've met somehow because he's the photographer for the book. And Akintunde has taken some incredible images. And I remember when I asked Akintunde if he wanted to go to Chibok, this was what, 2 years into the insurgency. The insurgency was actually raging, in Borno State. I went to Chibok on the first anniversary of the abductions, and I still remember how harrowing it was getting to Chibok. We actually changed military backup 4 times. And at each stop as it got more dangerous. And in fact, it took a while for them to give me permission to go. But as it got more dangerous, the type of military security changed. But I didn't realize how dangerous it was until I was coming back. For some reason, it was dusk, and behind me, there was anti-aircraft. In fact, I had to describe it to my husband to say, what was it? And he told me what it was. And I kept thinking, what are you doing here in the middle of nowhere in the evening? And the saddest thing was, I wasn't so afraid of being killed. My greatest fear the whole time was, please, they should just not abduct me. If they come, let me know that, I'm dead. And so even that should give you an insight into the horror of what it feels like for those girls to be taken. So, and Akintunde and his crew went in there several times. Lots of tears. I'm sure he can tell you about it. They broke down all the time. Because at the time when they were doing those interviews and taking those photographs, none of the Chibok girls had come back. And people were still arguing that there were lots of people who were still arguing that no girl had been taken. So let me start with you, Osai. Because of your background and the work that you do, what role should education play? I know, and in talking about that, please, I'd like you to weave it around your experiences as a tool for resistance and recovery for girls and women affected by conflict.
Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you also for being steadfast in this campaign to bring back the girls. I just wanted to clarify very quickly, at the time of the abduction, I was with Alliances for Africa, not Amnesty. Amnesty came afterwards. And I recall you coming into the offices then and speaking with Aisha Oyebode to say, we need to do something. And I think it's important to stress here that oftentimes we think we need to have a whole lot of things to start, but it was just someone who was outraged by what had happened and that the government was doing nothing about it. And so we don't need a lot of resources in order to kickstart, but see where we are today. And thanks for your leadership on this. So education has often been a tool that has been sold to us to lift people out of poverty, to create opportunities. And it has been an elusive tool for millions of people in Nigeria. Currently, there's nearly 20 million children that are out of school. UNICEF puts the number of those that should be in primary school to half of that number, 10.1 million. And that continues to baffle us in a society where 74% of Nigeria's children lack literacy, basic literacy, and math skills. So when you talk about the way Boko Haram have swept in northern Nigeria and the way society responds to those who have been impacted by the crisis, it tells you a lot. Because when people are not exposed, people are not educated, the way they reason and the way they associate themselves with those who come to save them is quite important, and it's relevant for us to put that in perspective. It is even more so when you look at the exclusion of girls from education and why the abduction of the Chibok girls plays a critical role to the situation Nigeria finds itself today. At the time the girls were taken, we had reached a point where Nigeria was doing quite well in terms of both boys and girls enrollment in school. Completion at university and secondary levels, we were closing the gaps. But I can tell you that in the last 11 years, those gaps have become even wider, as many more parents fear to send their children to school, particularly their girls to school. So what this means is that we're in a situation whereby we will not feel the effect now, but in a couple of years, when we look back, the impact of this crisis will take us back several decades. Education is also a tool that is used to create socioeconomic opportunities. In the work that I did with Amnesty International, working with people in the internally displaced people camps, we discovered that because the priority is often food, healthcare, shelter, educational facilities were not available to children in those camps as well. And this question was asked, how do we then ensure that when they do leave these camps and are absorbed into society, they will be able to live a meaningful life and a life that would bring them opportunities to improve their lot? And this continues to hang in the balance because they have to rely on several benefactors who often do not have the resources in order to implement access to schooling and education in those camps. If you permit me to also talk about how the situation just got quite out of hand, is lack of investment in education more broadly by government at both federal and state level, and the inability of many states in Nigeria to be able to access a fund that was created specifically to expand educational opportunities. The Universal Basic Education Commission provides that 27 states out of the 36 states in Nigeria currently are not accessing 54.9 billion funds, Naira funds in assessing universal basic education in their states. This comes to about 26 million pounds. And it shows that as long as education is not seen as a priority and we're not able to invest in it in a way that creates opportunities and secures the future of Nigeria's children, we will continue to grapple with the impact of the conflict as well as the impact this has had in the lives of those who continue to shell their children away from schools as a result of lack of protection and fear that children could be abducted in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Osai. Before I come to you today, I just want to ask Osai a question. I'd like to ask, before I come to you today, I'd like to ask Osai a follow-up question. So it's around, so we acknowledge that, we understand that there's a problem. And, you know, there's generally a role that we've talked about for women in not just post-conflict, but, you know, just society generally. So what is it that, you know, I keep asking this, what, where, how, that we can be doing differently in terms of empowering, you know, strengthening women in all of these processes, you know, especially at the grassroots, because they're often excluded. And, you know, that's what the tragedy of Chibok is, because with these women, the mothers felt at least they were exercising some kind of agency, and then that agency gets taken away. So what can we do differently now?
I think it's about looking at examples that have helped communities elsewhere, also in conflict. A lot have been said about the role of women in peace building and post-conflict reconciliation in Rwanda. We've also have lessons from Liberia as well, and Sierra Leone. And one of it is how women were able to organize themselves in their various groupings and have support outside of their communities in order to bring those cases to light. I recall a situation while I was at Amnesty where women were clamoring for women from Borno State who were impacted, whose husbands, brothers, sons were taken by the Nigerian military and were clamoring for their release. Many people felt because they were women, they would not be able to get access to the government, but they organized. They were able to document and show this. Many of them were not also literate women, but they were able to organize and show that with a lot of clarity, the men that were taken, their sons that were taken, and they brought those petitions before their representatives. And I recall one of the representatives had reached out to the women that had the opportunity to speak at one of the commissions that happened in Abuja, saying that if I were to help you to find out more about where your husband or brother was kept, because at this point in time, they didn't know where any of them were. Would you be able to, would you rally around the other women to vote for me when elections come? And you would not have anticipated that a lawmaker would approach a woman who is considered rural to actually make that request. But it's because they saw the mobilization that the women did. And the women organized and they were able to share the list of names, and they were able to work with civil society organizations to do that. Nigeria has signed up to so many resolutions, treaties all over. And the Women, Peace and Security agenda is quite alive in Nigeria as well. In fact, we are on the second or maybe the third national plan on that regard. And one area that has often lacked is the participation of women in peace and conflict resolution processes. And like the earlier panel had said, this is often a space that is invited, and women at rural or grassroots level are not often able to access those spaces. It's also a space where when you find experts who come with the knowledge and the experience that could be delegitimized because government does not want to look beyond a military response to tackling these issues. But we know that in communities and in countries where women have been involved in the peace building and conflict resolution processes, progress has been made, because oftentimes women will not look at a military action. They will look at ways in which they can bring people together in order to find a resolution to those issues. I also recall that there have been cases where religious leaders can play a key role in this regard as well, and where by facilitating those conversations and bringing people together, we can leverage that. It's also important how we look at our strengths. Women come with different skills and abilities, some in terms of the ability to speak up, others more in terms of bridging the divide, where there are differences, as we know, would occur from time to time. But it's how those of us in civil society are able to leverage on that strength that would bring that up. And maybe on one last point, the fact that women often are seen as victims has also played a role in terms of their role in these processes. Some time back, there was attempts to do like some sort of, I would say, amnesty program. And oftentimes that is offered to former male combatants. They ignore women who were active combatants or create a situation whereby women's roles, which were different under the conflict, were neglected. So in It then created a situation where both men and women have participated actively in the conflict, only men were then given an opportunity to rebuild their lives, and women had to go back to just nothing. And this is an area that often then makes it difficult for women's voices and their experiences of the conflict in all its ramifications to be brought to light. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're absolutely right, actually. And if you go back just very quickly to the subject of my research, which is that for even female suicide bombers, we could never make a distinction, or we couldn't understand that there was a category where you could be a victim as well as the perpetrator. And so the law never recognized that. And so some of the longest serving inmates today at Giver Barracks are failed female suicide bombers because they just don't know what to do with them. So I'll go on to Akintunde, because since Chibok, Akintunde has actually gone to and done a PhD. And I'm wondering, so we're talking now about education, how has your PhD, shaped or deepened your understanding of the Chibok story? Because you were there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Oyebode. I appreciate the fact that you gave me that platform to the opportunity to go to Chibok. I remember that the first time we met was on the field in late 2014 when we were on the street. I saw a woman who was at the forefront of Bring Back Our Girls, and somehow we were able to connect. And I think it was the following year, not 2 years later, it was the following year, about April, I remember that, what can we do? How can we, at the time I was working for Reuters News Agency as a photojournalist. So the idea of my PhD came way after, but to reflect back, the idea was to not just, you said it earlier, not just to think about the people, the who, and the where the events happened a year earlier, not just to think about them in statistics, but to put faces and to put humanity to the event that occurred a year earlier. And so that was how we began. But to connect my background as a journalist, where you are only ethically allowed to put out the story, to put out the text there for people to judge, I thought that to be more radical with what I was doing as a photojournalist was to also go further to do a PhD where I think I will have more freedom to elaborate on the who, the where, basically the 5WH, 5 W's and H we use technically in practice, in journalistic practice, that the 5 W's is the who is the person involved in the story, the where is the story occurring, and what really happened, and why. For me, it was the why that drove me to the academics, because in why, in journalism, you are ethically allowed to say, oh, this is the reason, but not just to hear your opinion. But I also think in academics, I have the freedom to make arguments, for me to take sides, because you have to make judgment in philosophical reasoning and logic. So I think is to kind of stamp what I was doing as a photojournalist, to connect the dot from journalism back to the academics. And I think at the center of that is photography, which I think Dr. Bulama said something about the absence of the media in the whole process. But I also think film making, photography as a way to stir conversations and to stir discourses, just as we're doing now, around issues of terrorism and women lack of opportunities to hear their voices.
So yeah, you're right. And so Chibok was an exceptionally painful story.
Exceptional because I recall one night we called you when we were trapped between Chibok and Askiria, because we were staying in Askiria. Askiria is like about an hour trip to Chibok town itself. but the whole place is Chibok community. It's a very large swath of land where, you have different communities scattered, which was like a year earlier was dominated by, as at the time we walked in, with the team, the whole place was still, abandoned, just with these women, connecting themselves with long distances in villages, which I experienced with the team. And then when we were trapped in Chibok at about 7:30 in the night, when we finished working that day, we couldn't get to Askira. We had to start walking on the street. And you can imagine if we had to travel by a car, it would take us about an hour. But we decided to start walking. And we were stopped by the local vigilantes, the local security men, because we were strangers in the dark, walking in the dark. And so we had to sleep. They had to accommodate us for till the following morning. And so you can reflect, even as a journalist, I could reflect on not just on the fears of the people, but on their experience or experiences of trauma, of fear, being attacked, every day by the terrorist. So for me, it was you really have to be in the middle of the whole story for you to have an idea of what the other person is going through.
Thank you for that. So I'll do his last question and then come back to you.
Yeah.
To you. And you did a great job of it. Those pictures are absolutely incredible. Anybody that has seen the book and see the photo exhibition, you really understand. Akintunde was actually able to go behind. And not only did he bring pictures out of the parents of landscapes, you can actually see how such a beautiful community, and it's one of the things I say about Nigeria and about Africa, is such a beautiful continent, and it's such a shame when, the stories that are coming out of that continent are so painful. But Akintunde gave us the opportunity to actually be able to remember the beauty of that continent, and you see that in the pictures. So Akintunde, my last question for you before I round up with Pasai, what do you want the audience today to take away from the images? A decade after Chibok.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think some of the portraits, somebody has asked me in the past that, they are just ordinary photos. They are just, because sometimes people look at photographs as though they are just ordinary. But it is not a pictures filmmaking. It's not, it's a process. It's a process. And when I say process, production, pre-production, post-production, and post-production. But the essence is to record history, because moments would pass away, and we tend to forget. We tend to forget, and the faces you are going to see in the exhibition are faces. Not I'm not thinking of those faces in terms of you reflecting on them from the perspective of pity or ridicule, but from the perspective of seeing them from the African condition that challenges all of us to see the struggle and the courage, as well as the pains that the subject, that's the who, that are involved. Because when we are talking about the girls, we are not just talking about the absences or the missing girls. We are also talking about the women who gave birth to them. Right? So I want people to reflect on those pictures, not just as ordinary pictures, but pictures that challenge how our collective humanity, not just thinking about it as a Nigerian problem, but as a global, call for action against terrorism. And, the earlier panel actually made it clear that Islam is not just about violence. It's not about violence. No religion preaches violence, which is one of the ways in which I've, documented, Yoruba culture and, Pentecostalism. Yoruba culture, African religious system, does not preach violence in any way. No religion, Islam, Christianity, or whatever religion that you may practice, I'm not sure any religious clerics had come out to say, oh, my religion is violent. So terrorism itself, when people use religious terrorism or Islamic terrorism, I tend to disagree because terrorism is just terrorism. Evil is evil. It has no religious inclination, religious attachment. Evil is evil, and it has no, for me, it has no religious backing in any way. So I want people to reflect on these, not just as a religious problem or Nigerian problem, but also as a global challenge and a call for action against terrorism.
Thank you, Akintunde.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, and you're right. Aside, it is a global challenge. So what is it? What can we take away from Chibok regarding the protection of girls' rights in conflict-affected areas worldwide?
I think the lesson is the fact that when we fail one part of our society, we actually fail ourselves. When Chibok's story broke and we got worldwide attention, people would have said, oh, they were just girls, right? But see where we are now. Now we're dealing with crises across the entire region. And it has spread because there was also for many people outside of those communities, there was also that insulation that, oh, it would never reach us, we will not be impacted. Now, people are not sleeping in their homes also in southern Nigeria. And it's linked to this. We didn't think food would be so expensive now. It's also linked to this because if people don't plant, then there's no harvest. We are dealing with a situation where it's become more apparent that what happens to one person happens to all of us. But whether we would have the courage in order to accept that, to move on, is the big question that we need to ask for ourselves. I think the other thing is around justice and this tension that appears to be between peace and justice. We can debate about it. People can bring opinions from both sides. But the reality is, the question is whose justice and who is impacted and who needs relief, who needs remedy. And the story of Chibok is really about how justice has failed the people whose children were taken. It has failed the girls. Many, of course, are women now, whose lives and childhood they can never get back. And how do we come to a point where people can get justice and what justice means for them? Because of the role I've played in many of, whether it's at Amnesty or Oxfam or Alliance for Africa, has often been around legal justice, prosecuting offenders, getting people to pay the price, to be imprisoned. But a lot of my conversations with people who have been waiting for a long time for justice, many of them want reparative justice, restorative justice. Many people want to go back home. They want to go back to their farmland. For that to happen, they have to be safety assured. Many people want, yes, I'm not going to get my childhood back, but at least I want to be able to set up a business. Where do I get access to that? And it shouldn't be a loan. It should be a grant. That means that I can have like a seed to plant. It's not about, and I know this also happened when Chibok happened, a lot of people offered us sewing machines for the women in Chibok and neighboring communities, but that's not what they wanted. So there's a lot of assumptions in terms of what justice looks like. But for us to be able to get to that point is to ask those who have been impacted by this directly what justice looks like for them, and use a number of tools to achieve that. The legal will still be relevant because if the law has been broken, in order for people to continue to have trust and belief in the legal and justice system, that needs to suffice. But for many people, justice has been long in coming, and right now they just want to be able to move on with their lives. But for us to be confident to say never again, we need to ensure that those who carry the greatest responsibility are not just the single people that were picked up for being associated with a terrorist organization. And we also know how many young men were tortured in order to confess to crimes that they did not commit. But that those who carry the greatest responsibility, those who should have acted that night, the girls were abducted, should actually be brought to book. They should be exposed. They need to actually let us know what truly transpired, and they should take responsibility for that. And I believe only then will people begin to build their trust again in the system, and also to see one another as human beings, regardless of what religion or which part of the country you come from. And that's the future that I would definitely want to see happen now rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Aisha.
Thank you.
It's always such a, an honor to, engage with both of you. Thank you so much. So we've got one more testimony of another of the Chibok abductees, and then we will now have Q&A, then close the session and move over to the formal commissioning of the exhibition. Thank you all for your patience.
Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Manam, and I am honored to share my experience as one of the Chibok school girls who were kidnapped in April 14, 2014. On that fateful night, Boko Haram came into our school while we were asleep and forcefully took us deep into Sambisa forest. From that moment, our lives were never the same. We lived like slaves inside that forest. We suffered through hunger, thirst, heavy rain, and constant fear. There were days we had no water to drink. Nights were filled with tears, silence, or explosions from a fighter jet. Many of us were injured. Some never made it out alive. I was one of those injured during an X-ray. The pain and trauma were overwhelmed, but I've learned to channel them into strength. Despite what happened to me, education had always been important to me. And even though it was violently interrupted, my passion to learn only grows stronger. With the support of my family and incredible help from Aisha Muhammed Foundation, I am on a journey to rebuild myself, to grow, to heal, and to become the woman I was always meant to be. Today, I live in Lagos. I am married to a loving and supportive husband, and we are raising a healthy baby boy. Every time I look at my baby, I feel something powerful. That hope is real, and even after fire, something new can grow. Still, as I speak to you now, 88 of my sisters still remain in captivity. 11 years they have been out there, living in silence, tears, pain, and trauma. Their parents continue to pray and wait, and we who are free will not stop talking about them. We will talk for them until they are found. I want to express my deepest thanks to Aisha Muhammed and the entire Muhammed Foundation for organizing this wonderful event, and also for continuous working on supporting girls like me. And to you all watching, thank you. Thank you for remembering and standing with her. Please support the Commission's effort. It is through your help that girls like me are not just surviving, but learning to trade. May we live to see the day when no girls will share a story like me. Thank you.
So thank you very much, everyone. So I think we can open up the floor for questions. And don't forget, we have both Elizabeth and Bulama also sitting on the floor. So if you have any questions to direct, if you want to ask general questions or you want to ask more specific questions, can we have hands up, please, for questions? Okay. Do you have a microphone? Do you know? Okay, you probably have to speak quite loudly. I'm sure you can do that.
Thank you so much. I think my question is very helpful. I'm a PhD student and I'm trying to explore alternative ways beyond conventional material law to address sexual violence. So based on the concluding part, you mentioned that what does justice look like for these people? So are there alternative mechanisms that you can suggest beyond the spectrum of international material law, international law, that can address sexual violence in conflicts?
Thank you so much. And that would be a very exciting research that I would like to look at. Sexual violence is often one that is one shrouded in a lot of silence. And I'm sure even on this panel, we've not adverted to it much because it's really up to the people impacted, how they want to be seen and what stories they want shared. In terms of alternatives, one thing that came out from some of the work I did previously was how people wanted to have some sort of closure to the experience they have. Sometimes it's an acknowledgement that what happened to them was not their fault and how they can get the support in order to live through that. Because the trauma remains. It is one harm that remains with the victim. It never goes away. And so in terms of compensation, it might not help to remove the pain, but from their experiences, it leads them into doing something for themselves or using that trauma in order to build something for themselves. Oftentimes, the justice system, if you also look at it really, how many cases of sexual violence actually lead to a successful outcome for survivors? Very little, it's less than 10%. So even in terms of us looking for alternatives, it's imperative that, for me, prevention is always the first key. I would rather say we look at ways in which we make preventive strategies more alive, because the trauma people have to go through as a result of surviving such a, I would say, life-changing situation is not worth whatever compensation or support to be provided afterwards. But oftentimes, survivors just want something that they can use to build their lives back. And each person is different and their situations are different. But that acknowledgement is important that they did not do anything wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking very well.
You have to speak up.
My question is to Dr. Oblama.
Yes.
I would like to know, in the course of your research, particularly to the very first factor, what part of the work was the most visible? Or like what's really so visible for them to, and what role the social media play in that? I mean, this includes Telegram, WhatsApp, Twitter. What role the social media play in that? And then my second question to you is, I do agree that military action are not enough or not enough to counter insurgency of terrorism, and that there is a need for broader socio-economic development, particularly in that region. In the course of my own research, I was speaking to someone who had attended some of the indoctrinations and teachings of Boko Haram when they were minority. And then including master students from the University of Nigeria, PhD students, they are attending those indoctrinations or teachings and they're being radicalized. And then it meant that education probably wasn't enough to deter them, from this teaching. So it does seem that there's a flip side to even it's not even just being educated or being enlightened. So there's something else going on there. If you want to shed light to it. There's a third question.
You'll have to reach out to him directly then for the third question. Please answer.
Then I'll shout.
Yes, so we can hear you, sir.
Interestingly, your two questions are related because reflecting on the first thread, it's a 5 minutes audio clip, and I remember listening to it time and again, and then the subsequent ones. And it was coded in the beginning, but towards the end, Shekau started expressing his frustration that he wants me to keep quiet, that you have refused to keep silent, even though I keep wanting you. And what did I do? What I did was challenge the core of Boko Haram's claim, which is that what they are doing is sanctioned by Islam. Because the group claims to be fighting a jihad sanctioned by Islam, and they claim that their fighters are on a divine project for which they get rewarded when they kill. And if they got killed, they die as martyrs who would go to the paradise. And the crux of my work is studying that ideology and challenging it. And that's what I worked for my PhD thesis with Professor Moshid Badri, looking at Boko Haram's claim for fighting a jihad. And what we did was actually to go into classical Islamic traditions and to primary Islamic texts to expose that as the lie that it is. That what they are doing is not a jihad, even under Islamic law is terrorism. It is not the path to paradise, it is the path to the fire of hell, and that their fighters are not martyrs, they are terrorists who will rot in hell if they died on that cause. And I posted a lot on that on social media, and I later learned that they monitor my social media. But I also spoke a lot on BBC Hausa, which is the most credible news source for Northern Nigeria, on VOA. And every time I had spoken, I would challenge the core of their message and say, this is the Islamic interpretation of what they are doing. And I think that's what unsettled them. Now, and then that takes me to your second question. I completely agree with you. Socioeconomic investment, investing in the kind of education we are running in Nigeria today is not enough. What you need is to challenge the ideology, and challenging the ideology needs working with the 1.6 billion Muslims that are not violent. Because there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, some say more than that. If you brought together the whole population of groups like Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, all of them, by all estimates, are less than 300,000. That's 0.00003% of the population of the Muslims in the world. But then in the media, they say Islam is terrorism. Donald Trump will ban all Muslims from entering the United States. Mosques are destroyed in many countries where there are Muslim minority. In places like Benin Republic, they had problems with the problem in the Sahel spilling over. And last year I was training their counter-terrorism officers in Benin. Most of them would tell me it's because of the mosques that are being built in our country that this is happening. What we need are more mosques. We need more Islamic schools to give quality Islamic education that teaches tolerance and coexistence and pluralism, which is intrinsic in Islam itself. The way the Prophet Muhammad lived with Christians and Jews and entered into treaties of peace with them and bought from them and sold to them. He even married some amongst them. And so that idea is what we need to challenge, and the most important vectors of communication are the Muslims that the media vilifies today. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I take one at the back and then we'll come this way and then this way? Okay, gentleman to the right.
Why didn't the administration at the time seem to take it seriously? And if they had, could the outcome have been different? But also, across administrations, I feel the understanding of Boko Haram has never been really made clear. I feel like the awareness of other terror groups of sorts around the world, there's even more information about them than Boko Haram in our own society.
You want to take this over? Yeah, okay, let's.
Well, when we're not speaking for the government of the day or any of the governments, I think the challenge has often been the cover-up. When there's been a failure of action, a series of activities are then done to control the narrative, and then it just makes the situation worse. And in effect, when you inherit something, you then continue the same thing. I don't know whether you were here when Bulama actually shared a story about how in trying to save the girls, money, billions of euros was paid into the hands of the insurgents. And it only just created a bigger problem because they now had resources in order to buy more weapons. So it's about how open government would be to tackling this issue and to be able to say, oh, we failed in this regard, we didn't have the appropriate intelligence, what do we do to go forward? And until that happens, you see this cycle repeat itself. So essentially that is it. Then there's also this tension between, there's often been this fear, I believe, that the military could take over again in Nigeria. And I think the government of the day had overcompensated the military leadership in order to keep them comfortable. We believe in you, we trust in you, because of that tension that they could leave the barracks at any point in time again. So that relationship also needs to be interrogated further in terms of how governance is experienced and what government's responsibility, especially in terms of information to its people, in order for us to unravel some of these deeply ingrained processes or practices, more like it, in order to control the narrative and determine and to ensure that they can fix it before it becomes more widespread or in public domain, but we know that that hasn't worked. And so definitely that tactic needs to change. And you need to bring communities who know their areas and their environments more into these governance spaces.
Thank you. I think His Highness also wanted to. Your Highness, we have to hear you. Yeah, a little bit louder, please.
You cannot make an Kenyan speak loud.
So,
So I just want to throw something into this conversation, following from what Budama said about Muslims and about Islamic education. And I brought this up in my anti-corruption lecture at Oxford in 2019, which is the whole question of our definition of what constitutes an education and who is educated and what is literacy. And the reason I say this is if you take northern Nigeria, you'll be told so many million children are out of school. But what is meant is that they're out of a Western English primary school. So if you have 10 million children in some sangaya or under a tree, studying the Quran, learning Arabic, able to read the entire Quran in Arabic, they are still illiterate. And because they are seen as uneducated, there's no plan for how to mainstream them, how to educate them, how to build on that education and bring them into society. If you're not studying English, then you're not educated. And then you take all the children in primary schools in the north, 60, 70%, at least the government schools, 60, 70% of them go through 6 years of primary education. They cannot read, they cannot add or subtract. They are not literate or literate. So 6 years wasted. Whereas these ones have had 6 years of a very good education in terms of being able to at least learn what they were supposed to learn, but they are uneducated. It's one question that needs to be asked. If we can find a way of seeing all these millions not as a problem, but as victims who need to be mainstreamed. And I keep saying, for example, the language of instruction. Why is it that you can be a medical doctor in Egypt, in Arabic? Why is that if you're in Egypt or Tunisia or Morocco and you could read or write Arabic, you're literate, but if you're in Nigeria, you are illiterate. How do we define literacy in context? I think this is something that is a big conversation, but it's something that I think we need to throw in as well. And as for the appeasement to the military, it's still going on. When I was governor of Central Bank, I complained about the huge political difference. And that's a lot of finance was, look, governor, please, just let them have what they want. You know, it's like they say, this is our budget, you give them the money, You can't ask questions. You can't audit the military because you're afraid of what they're going to do. And that is another dimension. Because how much have we spent on the military to defend Nigeria? And are we getting value for money? Nobody can ask that question because the politicians are afraid of what the backlash would be when you start investigating the generals and asking where the money is from. These are complex issues and that feed into the problem that we have.
Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you. I think Liz wanted to say something quickly.
Just really, really briefly, I think there were two narratives, and everyone, I don't know if you agree. The technical defeat narrative, which Buhari began almost immediately, 2015, I think that even was. It put it's very clear, I want to shut this down, even though it was extremely clear people were being victimized still. And also the rescue narrative, which was around the army clearing, bringing back mainly women and children actually from areas, was again, that's the end of the story now. All's good with these people, they're fine. And that was very much not the truth. And thirdly, the linkages to the global war on terror and the priorities of Europe and states in the global north around defeating ISIS, that is not a priority now for those states. And you can see, the epicenter of terrorism has shifted to the Sahel and also sub-Saharan Africa. There is a lack of willingness and impetus from European states, America elsewhere, and France, for instance, has pulled out of neighbouring countries, which have an impact on what's happening also in terms of jihadism in the region. So in terms of, what, I can't quite remember what the question was, but around why that hasn't happened or what really happened, these are also really important. And even though Buhari is not in power anymore, that impetus has somewhat been lost. And very quickly on what you said about education, many people who join terrorist groups of various ideologies are actually highly educated. There's been books written about the numbers of engineers that were active in Al-Qaeda, for instance. So critical thinking skills are often seen as the answer. But if the situation you're faced with, if your critical thinking says, well, this government's not doing anything for me, my people are being victimized, then it's your critical thinking skills that actually might lead you into a politically violent armed group. So that's my short intervention on that.
Thank you. Go on.
Yeah, education, sciences, mathematics, yeah. But what you don't find in any jihadi group in the world is someone who has a PhD or a degree in Islamic theology. And so, and when you look at the research, United Nations study that was published in September 2012, they had another one in 2023. The number of people in jihadi groups in Africa that can read and write in Arabic is less than 10%. So they thrive on ignorance of Islam. And the most dangerous thing is passion about religion and being ignorant about it. If you combine these two, then you will find yourself in a very dangerous place. But I wanted to speak just to a broader point to this question. Why did the Jonathan administration refuse to accept that the Chibok girls had been abducted in the beginning? This speaks to a wider Nigerian issue. And I want to say this because we are all Nigerians here, and I think we can do something about it. Everything that happens in northern Nigeria, it will be interpreted differently in the south. Everything that happens in the south will be interpreted negatively in northern Nigeria. Boko Haram, to many people in the south, is a project of northern Nigerian power brokers to keep the south out of power, to topple President Jonathan and take over the presidency. Some will say, yes, Buhari said we will the bamboo and will be soaked in blood if he didn't win the elections. I mean, in Nigeria, you even have people who believed Buhari is body double. Now, I was speaking to Professor Moshood, and I hope he will forgive me for saying this, but there was a professor of law who believed Buhari was not the real Buhari, he was cloned. This is a Nigerian professor of law believing that. He's from southern Nigeria. In the north, many people, when Boko Haram started, in my own community will come to me and say, oh, there are people who were trained in the Niger Delta that are killing us in the north. And then I bring out videos of Boko Haram fighters speaking the Kanuri language I was taught at home, which cannot be taught at Niger Delta at that level. And I start asking them, so they learn this language in the Niger Delta? So when the Chibok abduction happened, the narrative of the Jonathan administration was that this is a project by northern politicians to give your government a bad name. It didn't happen. It's a conspiracy. And they went on that until they got themselves to a place where denial was not possible, but accepting it became difficult because they went on this project too hard. And so I think as Nigerians, we need to do better. We know that amongst Hausas, amongst Yorubas, amongst all Nigerians, there are good people, there are bad people. And we need to start seeing ourselves as Nigerians rather than as Yorubas or Hausas or Northerners or Southerners, and start to presume good intention on the part of each Nigerian until it is proven otherwise. I just wanted to speak on this broader, this is a psyche thing. President Jonathan was a Southern president who saw himself being attacked by Northerners, so he didn't accept it. And the same thing is happening with Northerners, and we need to do better if we want Nigeria to be a better place.
That's true.
Thank you. Please, just 2 more questions. The last 2 at the back, and then, so you go first, and then Abdullah, you go on, and then we can wrap up, please. Okay, go ahead. You have to speak up, please.
The first question, not to ask, we have to understand that Nigeria does not exist in isolation. Nigeria is a part of the world. So, what is the Western Europe doing about it? On the 14th of February 2025, quote unquote, Congressman Scott Perry said, he spoke about USA funding some terrorists. He mentioned local and family. Which now brings me to the point of the intergovernmental actions against money laundering in West Africa under FOIC. He reported that ISO have laundered $36 million through the Nigerian financial system. And what would the Nigerian financial intelligence unit do when it came out to refute it? What are we doing without this? And that's why is it, I don't know, this is just a personal question, why is it that we are, after, quote unquote, right now it's like 2,163 former Boko Haram members have gone under de-radicalization, rehabilitation, and reintegration, the DRR program for 6 months and integrated into the Nigerian society.
Thank you. I think Bulama is, wants to go, itching to go, and then we can have the panel.
3 very, very important questions, and each of them is a lecture of its own. Now, starting with the first one, de-radicalization, if done rightly, has to be one of the different tools in the toolbox to counter groups like Boko Haram. Over the past 3 years, my work has been in Congo and Uganda, and what I am doing is overseeing a rehabilitation center for former ISIS DRC, ISIS Central Africa Democratic Republic of Congo members, and we have graduated over the past 3 years 194 people. But we have invested millions of dollars. We follow up for years to make sure they are still back in their communities. We give them grant to start livelihoods in their communities. We do fantastic preparatory work in the communities to even get them accepted and support their families throughout. I was the first researcher to gain access into Nigeria's de-radicalization program for Boko Haram members in 2018, and then wrote pieces for War on the Rocks for the Tony Blair Institute on that. What they are doing is not de-radicalization. They are just wasting their time, wasting the fighters' time, and they are eating Nigeria's money to unimaginable proportions. When I was in Abuja at the defense headquarters, they told me there were 300 people working at the de-radicalization center. 300 people. And there were 30 imams in Abuja doing de-radicalization. I went on the ground. I saw 2 imams. We interacted with all the staff. We went to the mosque with the imams to pray. I then asked them, where are the rest of you? They said, what are you talking about? We are two. In Abuja, Abuja pays money for 30 imams with their salaries, with their allowances, with their feeding, with their accommodation in Gombe. And who did I see there? No, I asked the imams themselves, do not even know Boko Haram's ideology. I asked them, what are the 5 pillars of Boko Haram's ideology? None of them knows. Now, how are these people de-radicalizing? And the imams are the only Muslims in the center. So you are expecting Christians to de-radicalize Boko Haram members. They don't understand Boko Haram in the first place. They don't understand the ideology. And then we take them back to communities. No one supports them. No one monitors them. And as we speak, I am gathering evidence from Goza, which was declared the headquarters of Boko Haram by Sheikh when he declared the caliphate. There are many people who went through that government radicalization program that have now gone back to Boko Haram, and they are today the ones who are launching the attacks I was talking about earlier. And that's what you find when you don't have a radicalization program that is proper, nor integration program that is proper. Nigeria's radicalization program is run by the Nigerian military. The first thing you do to succeed in radicalization is build trust. So how do you build trust between Boko Haram and Nigerian military for you to start de-radicalization? They are not doing de-radicalization, they are doing something else. Now, the second, around Boko Haram's finances, we have evidence that millions of dollars have been sent by ISIS. And there were even people, Nigerians, who were convicted in the United Arab Emirates. And what happens is someone would carry dollars in suitcases in cash from Turkey to the United Arab Emirates. We don't know where they emanate from Turkey to Turkey, but then from Turkey to the United Arab Emirates, they hand over the money to Bureau de Change operators, Nigerians by origin, who may be completely innocent. They may not know what is going on. And these Bureau de Change operators then fund their Nigerian agents to hand over money to Boko Haram couriers in Nigeria. We have tracked at least millions of dollars. I don't know whether it's up to 36 million. But I will conclude on this note. But then, yeah, you have the money, but the only thing they will do is deny. Someone called me from the Nigerian, a former government official, and he asked me a vital question. He said, you have been saying this and this and this on Boko Haram, and I have said publicly on BBC Hausa 3-4 things that were contradicted by the Buhari government, and after 3 months, they came back to the same BBC and admitted. No one has ever asked me from the Nigerian federal government, where are you getting your information on Boko Haram? Do you have more? Can you share with us? No one. At a point, I would brief the United Nations every 3 months. I will brief the EU delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS every 2 to 6 months. I will brief the USAID, but the US State Department, but the Nigerian government has never contacted me to this day. Where are you getting your information? Can you give us more? What can we do? No, I'm so sorry. Badaru did contact me, the current Minister for Defense. A week into his office, he called me and said, please, can you support us? And we have been working together since then. Now, the final point, Scott Perry, is pure conspiracy theory. USAID money has never been used to arm Boko Haram. And to understand Scott Perry's statement, we need to watch the whole video. It's 5 minutes, it's on YouTube. He is a Republican who opposes USAID, and he was giving a speech in the parliament in which he mentioned Boko Haram together with madrasas, Afghan Taliban, and ISIS, and he said American money was being used, but he didn't present any evidence. And he was giving that speech to justify Trump's administration's policy to ban or to stop USAID. So we need to understand his statement in that context, and there is no scintilla of evidence to that. And I can tell you, northeastern Nigeria, the estimate is now 400,000 people dead. If there was no USAID, more than 1 million people would have died. If there was no World Food Program and the humanitarian organizations that the Nigerian government vilifies, including the Borno State government, many people will have joined Boko Haram. Because there is no food, no water, no shelter, except either from Boko Haram or from these organizations. The Nigerian government is zero. So Scott Perry's statement is completely false, and but unfortunately it has been seized by many people in the north, and I think the environment is now even more hostile for international humanitarian organizations in the north.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the last question from Abdallah. Okay. Okay.
First one, with like internet conspiracies. We've seen recently with like some of the same thing with Biden. A lot of people are falling for internet conspiracies. Similar to how UNRWA was attacked by the Israeli government in Gaza, they've been discredited, similar to USA. How do we equip ourselves and how do we equip the population to be able to fight all these ideologies and all these conspiracies and stop ourselves from falling in the victims of it? Because even as educated as most of us are in this room, we still sometimes fall to some of these ideologies. So how do we stop ourselves from doing that? And my second question is, with the dissemination of information on the internet, it seems like a lot of people have become desensitized in terms of the violence that's going on globally. You end up seeing, oh, this happened somewhere. Everybody's kind of like, oh, just another, it's an everyday thing now. How do we get the world to start paying attention? Not only in Nigeria, but all over the world. There's so many wars going on, there are people dying everywhere. How do we start paying attention again? And how do we stop ourselves from just thinking, oh, this is just a normal thing, and just showing past it on our phones?
Thank you. So actually, Abdullah, both your questions are really useful. So I'm going to give all the panelists to opportunity to answer and just sort of round up their discussions. So I'll start with Mutake today, Liz, and then round up with Bulama. Okay.
Thank you. So this, yeah, we've always had fake news. It's just that it's faster now because everybody has a phone, there's internet, so it spreads faster. The only way we can stop it is if we all choose to check our sources and it ends with us. We're so quick to click on share button in order to break the news. I know there's a phrase for it now. Everybody wants to be the first to break the news. So we just also need to be alert to it because with people making use of artificial intelligence now, there's a lot more options for creating and, playing with pictures, sound, voices in order to spread this. So we all need to be alert. So it starts with us and how we educate people around us. For me, I always say, check the source. And if the source cannot be verified, then we are better not sharing that information. But that is the reality we face now. And I think for us to combat is to find a way that we can be more proactive with information. Because when there's gaps in information, people fill it with conspiracy ideas, fill it with, things that can move on. So even as organizations, when we have information, we should be proactive in sharing it to limit people's propensity for fake news. Then on the issue about wars, the truth is once there's this feeling of scarcity, people are going to fight because they want resources that they can lead on. We thought COVID helped reset the world, but we are falling back into our old habits again, where people who have a lot keep keeping a lot, and then those that have very little, even that little is taken away from them. And that is why what we're facing right now, even the calls to reform the multilateral system, the UN system, the World Banks, and all of that is key now that we need to go back to our roots to addressing that. But ultimately, it's about how we view the other person, the dignity of the other person. If we don't see ourselves as human beings and we don't see people that are different from us as human beings, we come back to this question that we need to fight in order to be relevant or in order to have a bigger share of the cake. I always say that it's not that the cake is small, it's about us putting our resources together to bake a bigger cake so that we all can have enough in order to thrive. Thank you.
Okay, I will take it from where you stopped. I think around the world, many people are finding a way to make themselves happy and out of the pressing issues that are going on. So a lot of more entertainment kind of overshadow our sense of search, our sense of finding out what is the truth. I know the truth is always, has so many dimensions, but just to corroborate what you said, yeah, I think, it is not unfair to entertain oneself, but also to flip on the other side and to find out what is the truth about some of the critical issues like the Scott Perry issues you mentioned. And I think sometimes we just need to do more research to find out what the truth is in a way.
Thank you. Liz?
Yeah, I mean, that's like $1 million questions. Like social media at the moment, especially with Elon Musk in charge of X, we can't look to leadership of these platforms. He's one of the key disseminators of conspiracy theories. It's a massive problem. Brazil obviously banned X very briefly when it refused to comply with legal orders. It's a threat to democracy. We've seen interference in French politics, German politics, the riots in the UK last summer. I'm not sure where this goes or where this ends, but we can't keep ignoring it. Obviously, I am in favour of free speech. I do not like censorship, but I wonder where the line will come, where there's going to have to be some thoughts about that. The desensitization and normalization is part of that. I think, ultimately, we see the Overton window being pushed, more far-right ideology becoming mainstreamed, pushback on DEI in America, having impacts on, trying to use economic power to say, for instance, we won't work with French companies that have got DEI inscribed in their regulations. So we're going to have to, I think there's a fight coming, essentially, online and elsewhere. And for me, it is what you said, empathy, our core values, that wherever they come from, whether we're Christian, whatever faith we have, whether we're Muslim, that we have some core sense of universal values as the values around us shift and change, and that we can stand firm in those. And through that fundamental connection as human beings, empathy and good intentions that Bulama mentioned, and assumptions of each other until proven otherwise, and not to succumb to these broader cultural and social changes which are hard to push back on.
Thank you for that, Liz. So I'm going to have Bulama give the last response, and then to close this part of the session, please, from here we're going straight to the H&R Gallery, which is just literally a minute away from here for the formal opening of the exhibition. But I'd also like to kindly ask Professor Farida Banda to just give us a few words to close, because she wasn't here when we opened. So Bulama.
No, thank you, Hajia.
Professor Banda. Okay.
I wasn't going to speak on social media because I am intellectually partly not sophisticated enough to what they did, and social media is a big problem. I was just showing here. I mean, I don't know why, but I just opened my Twitter and Malik Samuel, a leading researcher on Boko Haram, is just tweeted that Boko Haram has been attacking me over the weekend on TikTok.
Oh, yeah.
Boko Haram cleric with my photo.
Okay.
But to be honest, I don't get deterred by this, because Tony Blair told me something that was very valuable in the wake of the first attack when I went to his office, and he was very compassionate and empathic, and he said, but I think you should be happy because this validates your work. You should worry if they praised you, but if they are attacking you, it means the message is getting where it should get to. But really what I wanted to say is you do have conspiracy theory on social media, but today TikTok is a wild west for Boko Haram propaganda. They are live on TikTok every day. They do have accounts with 500,000 likes on TikTok, running live programs, inviting people to their cause. They are using drones, unmanned drones. They are using Starlink in the bush because they had internet issues. They produce their own explosives. They produce their own missiles. The Nigerian government is still waiting for the US to decide whether to sell to us or not. We are in a big mess, and Nigerian leaders don't understand that if Nigeria falls, they will suffer more than us, because the average Nigerian is already in hell. A professor of ours told me how he went to Liberia during the crisis in Liberia, and he saw Supreme Court justices, Liberian Supreme Court justices on queue to receive food from the United Nations with balls in their hands like almajiris. That's what will happen to Nigerian Supreme Courts and the ministers today. And some of them will think we have visas. That's before the crisis gets worse. Once it gets worse, every other country will shut down their borders, and then we will be left there. We have to have a country before you can even steal. And so at least invest something in the country for it to be sustainable enough for you to continue to steal. But I want to conclude on this note. We are gathered to remember the Chibok girls. And Hajia Aisha, even the legendary General Aisha Muhammed couldn't have asked for a better daughter. Because I've gathered here today, 11 years, only the parents have not forgotten these daughters. Only the parents. And just imagine if it was your daughter. How would you feel? These are parents with dreams and aspirations stolen from them. Their daughters in government custody, thinking their daughters are safe. But I'm glad that we are remembering them today. But let not this anniversary be a ritual. Let it be a call for action. Let it be a renewal of our promise. Let it be a renewal of our dedication and devotion to make Nigeria safe for every single boy and girl. And all of us have a part to play in that. We may sit down and just complain about leaders, but if we look inwardly, there is something we can do or something we should not do so that our country will become a better place. And I hope that's the message we take from this day, and not just see it as another anniversary or another celebration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that's such a beautiful way of ending. My name is Farida Banda, and I'm at SOAS, and I just wanted to take just 2 minutes, literally, to acknowledge the Emir for being here. Thank you. And for you, our distinguished guests, and for my colleague, Professor Badrin, for whom you have to thank for Dr. Bukati and Dr. Oyebode. And for you too. He's responsible for a lot. So we honor him too. You show somebody your care, your kindness, and your love for them by giving them your attention. By coming here today, by spending the morning with us, remembering 11 years ago and the Chibok girls, you have honored them. You have said when social media has moved on to the next trend, they matter, their lives count, despite the fact, as we heard, that they are quote unquote poor young Hausa women who do not have status or connections. You have reminded us that justice doesn't mean just us. Justice embraces all of us. And you have shown that care, and we honor and we thank you for your time. I said I was at SOAS, and I just wanted to take my last minute to say that the last time we had an honoring of the Chibok girls, we had 2 young students who just started their PhDs. One was called Aisha, and one was called Balama. And I've been an academic for many years, and that day or that evening, I remember thinking, they will make it. And they've done something else, and I wanted to specifically honor you, Dr. Bukati and Dr. Oyebode, which is when we do PhDs, we talk about reciprocity. And reciprocity for a PhD student is usually a hit and run. I'll come, I'll ask you questions, I'll get answers, I'll go away, I'll write my PhD, I'll get my book, I'll become an academic or become famous and do consultancies for the UN. And that's it. You haven't done that. Your reciprocity has been ongoing. It is a commitment that goes beyond the project. And in that way, you have honored these girls who have seen getting an education at Dickinson College, becoming voluntary mothers rather than involuntary mothers. And I just wanted to end by saying, Dr. Bukati, Dr. Oyebode, and of course, all our guests and our very powerful speakers, and the photography which we're about to see, thank you. In Shona, we say to no tender. Thank you. So we can move across now very quickly to the Aisha. Thank you so much, everyone.
Stop it.